So last class, you guys should have started work on the She Resisted activity, which kind of looked into this whole women's suffrage movement and women's rights movement. And so today we are going to be kind of taking notes and doing our lesson over the women's rights movement and women in public life. So your daily question, you should have already completed this. You're answering the questions based on this map here. So the first question, what does the map show? So, in the past, with a lot of the maps and graphs and charts, I always say look at the title. That will often tell you um, what you're looking at. In this case, it doesn't really tell you a lot. The title of this map is, or of this map is Victory Map. So, what does that mean, Victory Map? You kind of have to look at the key in this case to really get an understanding of what this map is showing you. So the map shows what states had full suffrage, what states had no suffrage. And we'll kind of jump to our daily word a little earlier because that's going to help us with answering this question. But suffrage is the right to vote in political elections. So, more specifically, this isn't just about who has the right to vote in what states, it's telling us in what states do women have the right to vote. And you can see on the key in the bottom left that the states that are white have full suffrage, which means women have the right to vote in all elections, all political elections. If a state is a solid black, then women have no right to vote in any elections. And then there's different different states that have kind of different voting restrictions. So you can see a state like Illinois or Nebraska or North Dakota. They have the right to vote in presidential and municipal elections, but that's it. A state like, let's find one. Well, a state like Arkansas, they can only vote during a primary election. That's it. So they can't vote for local elections and whatnot. So the key here shows you more about the map than the title does. The title Victory Map, in order for women to get full rights to vote, they need at least 36 of the 48 states to have full suffrage, to vote, to say yes, women can vote in our state. And so if we count right now how many states have full suffrage, which is the question for number 3, we're counting all of the states that are white. We have 17 states. And so in order for there to be a national amendment and national law that says women have the right to vote, there needs to be at least 36. So you can see there's a long way to go. And this is in 1919, but this is the map that they kind of used to kind of track their progress in order to get their victory, which is the right for women to vote. So make sure you submit that and make sure that you guys are getting those points. So our goal today, or objective, is identify reasons why women campaigned for reforms during the Progressive Era and how this led to the women's suffrage movement. And our daily word, which we kind of already talked about, is suffrage, which is the right to vote in political elections. So that's why we're talking about the women's suffrage movement. It's because it's the right to vote for women, and that's what we're really going to be focusing on, is women's rights during today's lesson. So throughout the Industrial Revolution, we see a lot of new opportunities for just about everybody. You know, we talked about the economic opportunities the Industrial Revolution provided for immigrants in a previous class, and that's why we see this like influx of immigrants coming to the United States, is for this land of opportunity. These opportunities existed for just about everybody in the United States at this time. Everybody very much saw the Industrial Revolution as this grand opportunity to improve their lives, to move to cities, to get to jobs, and to do things that they hadn't been able to do before. And that's the case for women as well. So during this time period, during the Industrial Revolution, many women turned away from just working in their homes, and they sought for change and for reforms and for bettering their situation in their own lives. And one of the ways that they looked to kind of make change is in higher education. So, on your notes, under opportunities for women, you should have during the progressive era, women sought higher education. We'll get on to the next box in a second. But what we mean by higher education is an education past high school, so like going to college. The first college that actually began admitting women in 1833, and that was Oberlin College. By 1870, which is right at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 20% of all college students were women. 20%. So we see in the next 30 years, as the Industrial Revolution really takes hold in the United States and all of these opportunities start to open up for people, that now more than 33% or more than a third of the student population in colleges are women. And so we have all of these opportunities for women in the United States to get more education at the college level. However, and even in many of these things that we're going to talk about, these are opportunities that are largely provided for white women. And so we'll have an entire unit over the civil rights movement, but it's important to remember that often when we talk about these changes, these improvements, this progress that we're making, it's often still highly focused on white Americans. And so a lot of opportunities like the opportunity to go to college and continue your education was still being denied to women of color. So I want you to pause it right now. Well, not right now. Let me finish this question. But I want you guys to guess, what do you think the percentage of women in college is today? In like 2020, 2021, 2022. How many, out of all the students in college, what percentage do you think are women today? So remember, in 1900, it was 33%. So what is it today? Just pause it. I want you guys to throw out some numbers. What do you guys think? So today, or in 2021, last year, women made up almost 60% of all college students. So, it goes from in the early 1900s that men predominantly were going to college, almost 70% of men. And now it's like completely flipped. Why do you guys think that is? I want you guys to have a discussion. You'll pause it again. Sorry, you're going to have a lot of pauses today. But I want you to pause it. And I want you guys to talk. Why do you think today, in today's society, why are more women going to college than men? So I'm sure some of you probably said because women are smarter, and that's not it. But I want you guys to think, hopefully you guys kind of came up with some ideas, but I want you guys to think about the stereotypical jobs that women have. I think if you just look around, I think a lot of you guys would probably say teachers, maybe nurses. A lot of jobs like that require a college degree today. Now, if you think of predominantly male jobs, especially like male jobs that you don't see a lot of women in, so like maybe a construction worker or a farmer or an electrician, a lot of those careers don't require a college education. They definitely require some type of extended education, but they don't necessarily require a college degree. And so I think today, even though these are very stereotypical male and female roles, and women can definitely be a plumber if they want it, and men can definitely be nurses if they want, we still kind of have these gender roles that we kind of adhere to. And so a lot of those roles that we kind of follow, in this case of careers, kind of lead, I think, more women to go to college than men. So the other opportunities that women sought during the progressive era is employment opportunities. So that's the second box. During the progressive era, women sought higher education and employment opportunities. And so not only are women getting more employment opportunities in places like factories, um, but now a lot of women during this time period are getting educated. They're getting college educated, and so they are also starting to expand into more professional careers as well. So we often talk about women in caring professions. Um, what do you guys think a caring profession is? I want you to pause it and come up with careers that you think kind of adhere into these caring professions. So, typically, if you're thinking about a caring profession, you're thinking about a job where you care for someone else. So, maybe a teacher, a nurse, a daycare provider, a social worker. Those are jobs that you care for other people. And so, oftentimes, those were predominantly women. But we also see women entering the business world. They become artists and journalists. One specific woman that really made a large impact was Ida Tarbell. And you could kind of call her a muckraker. Hopefully, you guys remember what a muckraker was a journalist who exposed society's problems, through print or political cartoons. And so we're going to actually watch a quick little video about Ida Tarbell, and then I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So make sure you're following along and that you're ready to answer some questions as a class. So now that you've watched the video, um, what kind of speculation can you make as far as why did Ida Tarbell, why did she go after Standard Oil specifically? So I want you to pause it. Who knows or who has an idea of why Tarbell may have gone after Standard Oil? So yeah, if you recall in the video, she talks about how her father actually worked for, I think, like what did she say, like a refinery, or some position within the oil industry. She grew up playing in the oil fields, and that it was actually Standard Oil who bought out her dad's company, and it eventually ended up kind of making them very financially struggling after her father lost his job with the oil industry. So, who remembers who owned Standard Oil? Who was that oil tycoon we talked about last unit? Right. So, hopefully, you remembered Rockefeller. Remember, he was the oil tycoon. And she talked about how Rockefeller and the Standard Oil Company kind of swept up all of these businesses. They caused a lot of people to lose their money. She didn't really look at Rockefeller in a very positive light, largely because he monopolized this industry, causing people like her dad to lose his job. So, what do we call someone who gets rich using ruthless business practices? Who remembers what that vocab term was from last unit? Yeah, so hopefully, you guys remember we call them robber barons. So Ida Tarbell definitely would have viewed Rockefeller as a robber baron rather than a captain of industry. But Tarbell uses her journalism um, to expose Rockefeller and how he created these monopolies. And they call her a trust buster um, because she busted up or broke up trusts or monopolies within American society. She actually gets Theodore Roosevelt eventually to pass a law that makes monopolies illegal. So we call her a trust buster for that reason. So, outside of just higher education and employment, women also look to use their talents and skills not just to improve their lives, but also to improve the lives of others around them within their communities as well. Um, and so, we know one of the big issues or one of the big areas that really needed reforming during this time was the issue of poverty, and especially the issue not just of poverty, but the issue of we have a large influx of immigrants coming into the United States who don't speak the language, who are often uneducated. In terms of a formal education, and they are coming with very little in their pockets. And so, one such woman by the name of Jane Addams, she really seeks to improve the lives of these people who are part of this working poor by opening what she calls a settlement house. It's right there in the very top line of that text. She established one of the first settlement houses, which she called the Whole House. You may want to write Whole House next to Settlement House. That's what her settlement house was called, and this was opened in Chicago, and it was opened really to serve the poor immigrants within Chicago and also the working class in Chicago that were really struggling financially during this time as well. Um, Jane Addams, she is known as the pioneer of modern social work. So she's kind of the first person, the first female, especially, to kind of use this idea of what we see now today as social work and apply it to this time period. So she's also the second woman ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which she won in 1931. So in your notes, you should have Jane Addams sought to improve the life of the working poor by opening a settlement house in Chicago. That settlement house was called the Whole House. She became a pioneer in the field of social work. So that's really going to be your key right there. When you see something that talks about social work, you want to remember that that's Jane Addams. We're going to watch a quick video about Jane Addams, and then once again, I'll have a few questions that you guys will kind of talk about and pause and discuss as a class. So let's recap again. Who did Jane Addams focus on helping? What group of people did she really focus on helping? And why do you think that is? Yeah, so she talked a lot, especially about working with immigrants, about working with the lower class of society, and that's largely because, especially for immigrants, like we just mentioned, they didn't speak the language. So oftentimes, if you came to the United States and you immigrated from another country, and you don't know English, it's going to be very hard for you to find very simple things like how do you go about finding a job or finding a house or going to the doctor. A lot of those things are difficult for someone who doesn't speak the language. And so the Whole House really helped immigrants get acclimated to life in America. She also talks about the settlement houses and the whole houses. She refers to them as neighboring with the poor. Why do you think she calls, or why do you think she refers to that, neighboring with the poor? What do you guys think of that? So I don't know if you guys caught, but at the beginning, mentioned that when you opened a settlement house, and she wasn't the only one who had a settlement house, other people eventually opened these up as well. But Jane Addams lived within this house. And so it wasn't just that this was a job that she went to from 9 to 5 and then, left work at work. She really immersed herself in her profession, in helping these people. So it wasn't just that she stopped by for a few hours each day. She actually lived with them. These people were her neighbors. And so she often referred to that as neighboring with the poor. Instead of just kind of walking by and thinking that, this issue of poverty didn't really affect her, she saw these people as her neighbors, as people that she wanted to help, and kind of focused on creating this overall general good of society. And so she referred to that as neighboring with the poor. She also mentions that her motivation kind of for doing this was because of the over accumulation at one end of the society and the destitution at the other. So destitution, it means essentially like an extreme form of poverty where like it's not just that you're poor, you don't have a lot of money, or you're living paycheck to paycheck, but it's an extreme form of poverty where you lack the means to provide for yourself at all. And so, what do you guys think she means by this? The overaccumulation at one end of society and the destitution at the other. I want you guys to pause that and talk about that. What does she mean by that? So, yeah, when she talks about the overaccumulation at one end of society, she's talking about the people who are living very luxuriously. So, the extremely rich people, people like Carnegie and Rockefeller. And then on the other end, she talks about the destitution at the other. So, then she's talking about these people that she's helping serve at these settlement houses, the people who are extremely poor. And so, in American society today, and we'll kind of talk about this a little bit in the upcoming units as well, we have this major wealth gap, this very extreme income inequality where we have men like Rockefeller and Carnegie making millions and millions of dollars. And then we have people like the ones living in these settlement houses that maybe work in a factory for pennies on the hour, and who just can't even afford to buy a meal. So we have this huge discrepancy in our society when it comes to income, when it comes to just overall means of providing for oneself. So Jane Addams really uses this to kind of help, or her goal is to help minimize that gap. So these are all the new opportunities that women kind of focused on, but then they're going to start trying to gain more political experience. So they know that in order for them to continue to experience these new opportunities, to continue to kind of progress within daily life, that it's going to have to get political. They're going to have to start passing laws. They're going to have to start pushing for more political experience. And so one big kind of focus that they have during this period is prohibition. And women really become the backbone for pushing prohibition during this time period. So, prohibition called for a ban on making, selling, and distributing alcoholic beverages. So, when we talk about this era of prohibition, it's going to be during this time period where alcohol and alcoholic beverages were illegal. And I want you guys to kind of look at these, and I want you guys to kind of analyze these advertisements essentially. And what do you think? What's the message that they're trying to portray in this? So if we look at this, it says, "Help me to keep him pure. Please vote against the sale of liquors." And so who is she talking about? Keeping who pure? Um, She's obviously talking about her little baby. When she's saying she's wanting to keep someone pure, that means she's wanting to keep him innocent. So please vote against the sale of liquors. What do you think is the message behind this? And I'll give you a heads up because last year a lot of people mentioned this. It's not that she wants to keep her baby from drinking alcohol. Babies aren't drinking alcohol at this time. So, what do you think she means by this? Help me to keep him pure. Vote against the sale of liquor. So, I want you guys to pause it and kind of analyze this message. What is she meaning? So hopefully you guys had a good discussion. Essentially, she's saying like if there's not the opportunity for people to drink alcohol, then this little boy he's going to grow up and he's going to remain pure and innocent, and he's not going to get involved in this drinking of alcohol. So the other one over here, I want you guys to look at. You have this lady here who looks pretty done up for the early 1900s, and it says, "Lips that touch whiskey are lips that will never touch mine." So who is the message, or what is the message here, and who is the target audience, do you think, for this ad? So I want you guys to pause and I want you guys to kind of talk about that. What's the message? Who do you think they're trying to target? What group of people? So yeah, the message is essentially, if you're a man, so the target audience is a male audience. If you want to get a nice woman or a pretty woman, that you won't drink alcohol, because this woman is saying like if your lips drink whiskey, you won't be able to kiss me. So we see ads like this that women are putting on to kind of push this idea of prohibition, push this idea of making it illegal to drink alcohol. And in fact, um, with the 18th Amendment in 1920, um, the 18th Amendment is passed, and that actually bans alcohol in the US. And if I just back up a second, we talked about some of these problems that existed in the United States during this time: poverty, crime, violence. A lot of those things that we talked about were happening in urban areas. Um, a lot of people, and especially people who supported prohibition, supported this banning of alcohol, believed that alcohol was kind of responsible for this. And so they thought that if they could eliminate the consumption of alcohol, that they would see the elimination of crime and poverty and violence. So prohibition itself kind of becomes this huge social experiment. Usually we do these experiments in like a controlled environment with like maybe a few hundred people, but this is like a social experiment that encompasses the entire United States population. Can a law change behavior? So, do you think that by passing this law that says alcohol can't be consumed, is that really going to change a person's behavior? And some people may say no, some people may say yes. Um, I think in some aspects it does change behavior, in other aspects it doesn't. In the case of the 18th Amendment, um, banning alcohol, it doesn't actually make people stop drinking. Instead, we actually see almost the opposite. We see the rise of organized crime, like the mafia. When we think about like Al Capone and kind of um, those types of, like mob bosses, that's during this time, during prohibition, and a lot of them make their money by selling alcohol when it's illegal. We see this rise in bootlegging, which is, transporting alcohol. Um, we also see the rise in illegal bars known as speakeasies. So we see these like fronts being put up, and like it's really just people going there and drinking. We see the rise in people making their own alcohol. And so this idea that the 18th Amendment was going to eliminate crime and poverty and violence, and that the American people were just going to stop drinking, doesn't actually happen. It's really kind of the only failed constitutional amendment, because later then it's actually repealed. And so the 21st Amendment, which was passed in 1933, actually repeals prohibition, which is why we can all drink legally if you are 21 in the United States. So, nonetheless, this law was in effect for 13 years. So, for 13 years, it was illegal to consume alcohol. So, remember, you have all of these amendments. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. You have all of these amendments that you're trying to remember. So the 18th Amendment bans alcohol. And so I just kind of think the 18th and the 21st, those are the two kind of ages of being legal to do something. Like 18th Amendment, you can buy a lottery ticket. 18th Amendment, or not amendment, when you're 18 years old, you can buy a lottery ticket. When you're 18 years old, you can legally buy tobacco. You're considered an adult. And then obviously when you turn 21, you can legally drink alcohol. So both of those ages, 18 and 21, are kind of the big ages for you getting to do something now that you weren't able to do beforehand. And so I always think the 18th and the 21st both have to do with prohibition. The 18th is the one that bans it, and then the 21st is the one that repeals it. So, throughout all of this time, obviously, women are looking to um, seek greater higher education opportunities, more employment opportunities, more political opportunities. All of this is kind of centered around them earning the right to vote. And, we're going to talk about when this happens and when it kind of some of these organizations start to be formed. But the actual very first attempt to organize a national movement for women's suffrage happened in Seneca Falls, New York. during the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. So this is well before the Industrial Revolution. This is really long before what time period we're even talking about now. So this whole concept of women earning the right to vote has been going on for a very long time. It's not until 1869 when a woman named Susan B. Anthony actually formed the National Women Suffrage Association. And so in your notes, under the rise of women's suffrage movement, you should have Susan B. Anthony formed the NWSA in 1869 to campaign for a constitutional amendment to give women the right to vote. So it's during this time period that women are getting more involved in all of these areas of society, that they really start to demand the right to vote. And so they campaign for this constitutional amendment to give women the right to vote. And through your activity that you guys did last class with the She Resisted, you kind of got an insight into the ways that they did so, through strategies like street speaking and propaganda, parades, pageants, clubs, conventions, pickets, and even imprisonment. And so many women during this time that they're kind of demanding this right to vote and working towards gaining this constitutional amendment, they do end up going to prison oftentimes for doing so. So finally, in 1920, Congress passes the 19th Amendment, giving women full voting rights. And so now in the United States, all U.S. citizens have the right to vote. That doesn't mean that everybody in the U.S. has the right to vote. Obviously, there are still voting restrictions. If you've committed a felony, if you're in prison, you don't have the right to vote. But still during this time, Native Americans don't have the right to vote because they're not considered actually American citizens. And despite the fact that we have this constitutional amendment, there are still voting restrictions within the U.S. that kind of inhibit some groups of people, predominantly African Americans and people of lower class, to vote. Things like literacy tests, poll taxes, interpretation tests, and just overall violence. And so a lot of these things kind of prevent people from voting. But in 1920, women finally gained the right to vote, and it took 72 years. So from that very first convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, it took 72 years for the United States to pass this law, to pass this amendment in 1920 to give women the right to vote. So in 1920, Congress finally passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in changing social norms in America. So that is today's lesson. You guys should be spending the rest of class time finishing the She Resisted activity that you guys started last class.